All right. So we left off last class with the. Are we good here? It's a little out of frame. Let me see if I can fix that. Something's going a little goofy with the projector. Or maybe it's the screen. Yeah, that's weird. All right. You guys have the notes though. All right. So events of the civil rights movement in 62 and 63. James Meredith over here. He became the first African American to enter the University of Mississippi, and he will be the first African American to graduate. There was so much violence and so many protests against his admission to the University of Mississippi that Kennedy had to send in 5,000 soldiers to assist this guy to go to college. Absolutely insane. In 1963, Dr. King was arrested. Hey, what's up? Arrested and jailed for anti-segregation protests in Birmingham, Alabama. This is where he will write letters from Birmingham jail arguing that individuals have a moral duty to disobey unjust laws. Also in 1963, during a nonviolent protest in Birmingham, Commissioner of Public Safety Eugene Bull Connor used fire hoses and police dogs to stop nonviolent protesters. What made this protest a little different than the others, obviously we have learned about violence used against nonviolence. This was broadcast on national news. So this is a pivotal moment when people in 63 see the treatment of nonviolent protesters. Has anyone ever seen that footage before? It's hard to watch. And then also in 1963, he's just out of frame here, NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers on June 12th, he is shot and killed in his driveway in Jackson, Mississippi by Byron De La Beckwith, who was acquitted twice and was not convicted for the murder for 30 years. Has anyone ever heard of the film Ghosts of Mississippi? It's based on the death of Medgar Evers. It's a tough film. All right. 1963 March on Washington, August 28, 1963. This is a really big event, and it's nonviolent. 200,000 people marched on Washington for changes to civil rights. The guy that led it, A. Philip Randolph, remember him from the Double D campaign we talked about during World War II? Lots of groups are involved. Congress of Racial Equality, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, members of the NAACP. Obviously, some of these organizations overlapped. This is where Dr. King gave I Have a Dream speech. I always have to give it up to my friend Susie. She was like 17 in Georgia. Told her parents she was like going to hang out with some friends. And they boarded a bus from Georgia to Washington to go on this march without their parents knowing. So we called her the Queen Bee. She's now retired. She's an awesome teacher. This is has major influence because there were politicians and all types of critics before this went down. People were saying, oh, yeah, this is going to be a bloodbath. There's going to be all this violence. And it was totally peaceful. And again, the I Have a Dream speech was very powerful, and it demonstrated the power of nonviolent mass protest. You can see there the National Mall on the bottom right. Sadly, we have a sort of response, not just to the March on Washington, but also laws were starting to change, or the push for laws were starting to change in Birmingham. That was where the SCLC's headquarters were. There was a huge presence at the 16th Street Baptist Church among civil rights leaders, not only in Birmingham, but in the South. And a group of Klan members planted sticks of dynamite under the steps of the 16th Street Baptist Church. But when they detonated the dynamite, it exploded into a Sunday school classroom, killing 4 children. I think 3 of them were 14 years old, and one was like 10 or 11 years old. And those children here, we have Addie Mae Collins, we have Carol Robertson, it's just a little bit out of frame there, Cynthia Wesley, and Denise McNair. This leads to widespread protests in Birmingham. It's also going to lead to the death of 2 more African Americans when the protests turn violent. And I want you to understand this event starts to push some of the people out of the nonviolent strategy of the civil rights movement, and some people become much more radical. Stokely Carmichael is a good example here. Questions up to this point? All right, the struggle for voting rights. The 24th Amendment will be passed January of 1964. This will outlaw the poll tax, so no longer do you have to pay to vote. We also have a coalition formed, the Council of Federated Organizations, the COFO. This is when members of CORE and SNCC come together, and in the Freedom Summer of 1964, they are going to go on this crusade to get African Americans registered to vote, because what is 1964? What is that year in terms of elections? Yes, it's a presidential election. LBJ is going to run and will win as the Democratic candidate, and he's running on a platform of what is called the Great Society. Much of what is involved in LBJ's Great Society is a push for civil rights laws. This will ultimately lead to Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we'll talk more about Johnson's Great Society when we get into contemporary America. But the Great Society is like welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, government, housing, Head Start, National Public Radio, public broadcasting, civil rights acts. A lot of that was part of LBJ's Great Society program. He called it a war on poverty. This is the most sweeping civil rights legislation we've seen since the end of the Civil War during Reconstruction, with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment. So this also proved that the federal government had the power to enforce desegregation. So these are the civil rights laws in a nutshell for you guys. We have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That prohibits discrimination based on race, religion, gender, etc. This desegregated all public places. Voting Rights Act of 1965 is going to eliminate literacy tests. It's also going to make the process for African Americans and minorities to be registered to vote much more robust. And then the Civil Rights Act of 1968, the Fair Housing Act. This meant that you could not discriminate when it came time to provide home loans or the ability for people to rent. And it was a goal to bring about an end to redlining, but that's going to take time to move away from. The death of Malcolm X. Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little in Louisville, Kentucky. He is an African-American Muslim minister, human rights activist, and a prominent figure in the civil rights movement. He was also a black nationalist leader. For a while, he was a spokesman for the Nation of Islam, an advocate for black empowerment, promoted the civil rights movement within the African American community. He goes on to become the founder of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, but he is going to have a change of heart after a visit to Mecca. He splinters and cuts ties with the NOI. And in 1965 in Harlem, during a speaking engagement at the Audubon Ballroom in New York, he was shot and killed. The three assassins that are believed to be the sole assassins were members of the Nation of Islam that had problems with Malcolm X splintering. However, his death is shrouded in mystery because what we do need to realize is that there were government agencies that had numerous civil rights leaders under surveillance. Malcolm X, Dr. King, leaders in the Black Panther Party. So this is one that is still hotly debated and very controversial. Any questions up to this point? March from Selma to Montgomery. This guy right here, John Lewis, is going to lead this march in March of 1965. They led the march in Montgomery to support the Voting Rights Act, but they were stopped at the Pettus Bridge, and they were met with violence. John Lewis, who was a leader in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, will go on to serve 17 terms. Marchers were hospitalized after police force used tear gas, whips, and clubs against them. That was dubbed Bloody Sunday. And the subsequent and successful march will not resume until March 21st, through the 25th, 1965. This event was made public nationwide and was public internationally. And this is what pushes Lyndon B. Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act into law, the incident of Bloody Sunday. Riots, executive orders in the Black Panther Party. Riots erupted in predominantly African American communities. There was this especially violent riot that occurred in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles in the summer of '65. Other major cities and years in which riots broke out: the summer of '65, '66, '67, and of course 1968, one of the craziest years in modern American history. The closest thing that I would compare '68 to, bless you, that you guys have lived through would be like 2020. '68, well, I'm going to carve out a portion of the lesson in contemporary America to just talk about that individual year. So other cities where riots unfolded: Detroit, Newark, New Jersey, and DC. Sadly, a lot of the African American businesses and community run organizations and churches, those were the places that were ultimately destroyed, which further set the African American community back during the riots. LBJ will issue Executive Order 11246, which will allow for affirmative action, notably for the admission to college, as well as the ability to obtain jobs. Contractors had to take affirmative action toward prospective minority employees in all aspects of hiring and employment. The militant Black Panther Party came about in 1966. They were led by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in Oakland, California. Stokely Carmichael joins that organization in 1967. They were more radical, more militant. Other chapters of the Black Panther Party are going to form in cities like Chicago and New York. They're also pretty instrumental in the protest against the war in Vietnam, because a lot of young African Americans were being drafted into the Vietnam War, which we'll talk about that when we get to contemporary America as well. The assassination of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy in 1968. In April of 1968, Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee to support African American sanitation workers who were on strike due to racial inequality. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., at the age of 39, was assassinated, shot, and killed as he stood on the balcony outside his hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. Escaped convict James Earl Ray is believed to be the lone gunman. It's kind of like the assassinations of JFK, Malcolm X, and MLK are always debated if there were more actors than just the assassins. Presidential candidate Bobby Kennedy. Remember, LBJ does not seek re-election in '68. Bobby Kennedy is going to be going for the Democratic nomination. And on June 8, 1968, in a hotel kitchen in Los Angeles, Bobby Kennedy will be assassinated by Palestinian Jordanian immigrant Sirhan Sirhan for his support of Israel. Again, these are just a couple of the events of '68. The death of MLK led to widespread protests and riots, and the death of Kennedy also led to public outcry. All right, Supreme Court cases beyond Brown v. Board and Davis. Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States was decided on December 14th, 1964. The Supreme Court forbade racial discrimination in hotels, motels, restaurants, theaters, and other public accommodations that participated in interstate commerce. On June 12th, 1967, the Supreme Court ruled in Loving v. Virginia, that's Mildred and Richard Loving from Caroline County, Virginia, down on the bottom right. This is going to outlaw the 16 states that had banned interracial marriage, which were southern states predominantly. So this will allow for interracial marriage. Swan v. Charlotte Mecklenburg, Board of Education, that was decided in '71. The Supreme Court ruled that busing students was a legitimate means of achieving integration in public schools. In 1978, Regents of the University of California v. Bakke, this was a really close decision that allowed for affirmative action to be used in the decision of creating a diverse student body in public university admissions across the country. Highly recommended film series that you guys should take the time to watch, Eyes on the Prize. It is timeless. And what is impressive about the series, each segment deals with a significant event from the civil rights movement. We looked at the Brown v. Board part of it last class, I believe. It also entails detailed interviews with people who lived through and participated in the civil rights movement. So, well worth your time. Questions up to this point? You guys good? All right.